Thank you, Pastor Bob. Good morning, everyone. And I'll just take a few moments just to introduce myself a little further. I know that most of you know who I am, but some of you don't. And so my real name is not Erndog. And my name is actually Ernie Breitkreuz. And as I was growing up, it was very, very, very German. And my real name is Ernst Breitkreuz. So if you can pronounce that, you do just fine. So as I was growing up, that was me. Nevertheless, I just wanted to share and introduce myself a little bit. Sycamore has been home for me and my family for the past 32 years. I am the father of 3 wonderful grown children and also the opa of 4 grandchildren, whom I love very much. And they're all boys, and I keep encouraging my family and saying, we need to get a recipe for a girl in here somewhere. And I'm still hopeful that's going to happen, and I think it will. Also, I am the widower of a most wonderful wife that I was just so privileged to be married to and blessed to be married to for 40 years. Her name was Darcy. I won't go into a lot of details about that today, but approximately just over 4.5 years ago, she passed away and went to be with the Lord. And that had put me through a very difficult and trying time in my life. However, I have managed to pick my head off the ground. And thanks to Jesus and my children, my family, and many, many of you godly folks here that came alongside of me and helping me through my journey. Sycamoose has been a place that my family and me has grown to love. And before moving to Sycamoose, my wife and me lived in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, where I was born and raised. And then we were in Regina for a number of years, Prince George, and then, of course, the last number of years in Sycamoose. For those of you that don't know the season of life that I currently find myself in, I will share a bit of my story with you. What just happened of recent. And most of you, I'm sure, have heard the saying, it's all fun and games until there's an accident. And that's certainly what happened to me. But approximately 4.5 months ago, and to be the exact, it was September the 29th of 2018, my grandson and me, his name is Joshua, I just called him Josh, we had decided that we were going to take side-by-side up the mountain and go for a ride like we had done many, many times before. And if you don't know what a side-by-side is very much like an ATV, only instead of the driver and somebody sitting beside, you sit side-by-side like you do very much in a vehicle. And we have chosen to go up the mountain that day, and it was no different than any other day. We were going to go up, and we very much enjoyed the mountaintop scenery and the wildlife that we would encounter along the way. So we left and we started heading up Owlhead Mountain, and we were going to be back in Sycamoose for a hockey game that night, and so we headed out later in the afternoon and we made our way up the mountain, and as we got to about the 24-kilometer range, I had said to Josh, I said, I think it's time that we turn around and start making a descent down the mountain. So he begged and said, well, Opa, let's go on a little further. And so I agreed, and we went on to about 26 kilometer. And then we found an opening a widening in the road, and we decided to turn around there. And in the process of his turning around, it was a bit muddy there, and he over-accelerated. And in his over-acceleration, the vehicle started to tip towards my side. And I had to make a quick decision. Either I was going to stay with the machine and perhaps get crushed on my upper body, or if I stayed with the machine, I might get punctured from the stuff that was at the side of the road. So I chose to jump. And as I jumped, I cleared the machine, but one part of my body didn't, and my right leg stayed behind, and it got trapped under the row bar of the machine, and it crushed my right leg. And I immediately knew that I was in a lot of trouble when I looked down, and there was just massive amounts of blood everywhere. And of course, Josh panicked, and he was running down the road because he was going to go and get some help. And we were 26 kilometers up the mountain, and I knew right well that if he left me, that I wasn't going to make it down that mountain alive. And that crossed my mind that day. Anyways, I screamed at him at the top of my voice to try to get his attention, and I finally did. So he came back, and I said to him, Josh, Opa's in trouble. You need to lift this machine off of my leg. And so I was able to get my leg out from underneath the machine. And then I told him, and as I tried to force myself up to the shoulder of the road, closer to the machine, which I did. And then I said to him, Josh, I said, you have to lift this machine. Somehow we have to upright this machine, and those machines aren't light. And he says, Opa, I can't do it. And I said, we have no choice. We have no choice. Either that machine gets uprighted or Opa will die up on this hill. And so he lifted, and I pushed, sitting on the ground. And I don't know how, I have no idea how, but the angels were obviously there, and they helped upright that machine. And when that machine got uprighted, it fell toward the gas tank on my side. And once we got uprighted, and I grabbed him, and I said, you need to help me in the machine. And my foot was dangling, so I held my foot with my left hand, and I had him around the neck with my right arm, and I got myself back into the machine. And I said, Josh, we need to throw everything in the back that was tipped over into the machine, and we need to see if we can start this machine. And folks, I can't even begin to tell you. He threw all the stuff in and quickly sat into that machine and turned the ignition, and within one turn, that machine was running. And I thought, okay, I just might make it down this mountain. And so we started our trek down, and I said to him, I said, Josh, on the straight stretch, put this thing to the floor and make sure you turn down on the curves. And I was wise enough then, I had taken an industrial first aid course about 20 years ago. So as I got into the machine, I took my pant leg and I wrapped it around my leg as tight as I could. And then I pulled my knee up, and I stuck it in the crux of my arm, and I pulled it into my chest to try to curb the bleeding. Otherwise, I was not going to make it down that mountain. And with my left hand, I held my dangling foot. And so we headed down the mountain, and we didn't have any cell service till we got to about 16 kilometers. And as we got to the 16-kilometer range, we finally got into cell service, and we phoned 911. And God bless those people for sure, because they do a great job. But they were asking where we were and all kinds of questions. And I said to Josh, you just tell the lady that we're up the mountain, and everybody in Sycamoose knows where Owlhead Mountain is, and we need an ambulance at the bottom of the mountain, like right now, because if we don't, I'm going to bleed out and I won't make it. And then we lost cell service. And so, and it was right around the 14-kilometer range that I was starting to feel faint. And I said to Josh, I said, I'm starting to faint. And I said, if I don't get anything here, I says, I'm going to faint. And so I said, we always carry some supplies. And so he quickly stopped and got me some water. And I drank a couple guzzles of water, and I poured the rest over my head. And it rallied me enough that I was good to go. And then we phoned 911 again, and were able to get hold of them. And the second time around, we were able to complete our conversation with 911. And I just told him, and I wasn't on the phone, Josh was, as I was trying to hold on to my leg. And I told him, just get an ambulance to the bottom of Owlhead Mountain, and we need one, because otherwise Opa's not going to make it. And so by the time we got down to about the 4 kilometer, we had some first responders coming up to help, and I said, we can't stop. We just kept on going. And I can't tell you, folks, by the time to the 2 kilometer range and looking down the mountain, I saw the flashing lights of an ambulance, and I'd never been so happy in my life to see an ambulance. And so I got to the ambulance, and they patched me up really quickly and got me into a waiting helicopter that couldn't land because it was getting too dark there, and there was too many trees in the way. And so the helicopter landed at the Ball Diamond in Sycamoose, and the ambulance quickly got me into the helicopter. And by the time I got there, they had made me sign some papers, and for some product or some medication that I might need en route. And they lifted off, and I don't remember much of the helicopter ride, but by the time we got to Kamloops, he did tell me, the paramedic there said to me that they'd have to give me some blood product en route because I wouldn't have made it. He said, you're probably 15 minutes from not making it. So they had to give me some blood and some stuff along the way. And he said we were 28 minutes from liftoff to landing from Sicamous to Kamloops. And as I got into the hospital, I was kind of dazed with all the stuff that had happened. And I just remember laying on the stretcher and the doctor standing over me, and he said, we're going to go into surgery like real quickly. And he said to me, he said, we already had a look at your leg and it's not in very good shape, and we should probably consider taking the leg. And I said, Doc, please, if there's any way at all that we could save the leg, that we would try to do that. And so he said he would try to save the leg. And I went into surgery and woke up about 1:30, 2 o'clock that morning. And my son was standing by my side, Adam, and he was encouraging me with words of, Dad, you did fine, and it's all going to be okay, and you'll be fine. And the only thing is the doctor said that we're going to have to talk about that leg somewhere in the days ahead. And so I sent him to the hotel, and I tried to get some sleep in the brokenness of the pain and everything that I was in, and tried to make sense of what just happened, what the reality of what just took place here. And I finally did get some sleep, and the next day woke up, and the doctor came in later on that afternoon and said, we need to readdress this leg again because it's not in very, very good shape, and you probably are not going to have a working leg. And so they came in that afternoon and had a chat with me and said to me that we should probably consider amputating the leg. And boy, that's one thing I didn't want to hear. I wasn't going to listen to that word at all, amputation. And so I said, Doc, please, is there any way at all that we can still work with this? And he said, okay, we'll try to do another surgery on it. So the following day, I went into another surgery, and they were going to rebuild and reset and clean up and do another work on the leg. And after a 5-hour surgery, I was still in the recovery room, and I do recall the nurse standing over me and saying that I was in the recovery room and the surgery had gone fairly well. And I remember laying on that stretcher, and I was in so much pain, and I had an oxygen thing in my nose. I had 3 shunts in my right arm and 2 in my left arm. And at that point, I was ready to give up, and it was just horribly painful. And I remember laying there, and I was staring at the ceiling, and I thought, you know, Lord, just take me home. I just want to be with Darce. I want to be with my wife. Just take me home. It's so painful. I can't. And I just laid there and I closed my eyes. I thought, you know what? Maybe it's time to go home. And I don't know how long I was in there. I might have been in there for minutes, hours, whatever it was. But I remember waking up, and people were calling me, and it was, Pop, Dad, how are you? And as I came to, I started to recognize that it was my children calling me and waking me up, and I looked, and I thought, and as I got cognitively straightened out, I realized it was my family calling me, and I looked up, and there was my children. I thought, oh, okay, Lord, remember what I said back there? Just can you kind of forget that? Just leave that thought, just forget it, take that away. My children still need me, and I still want to be with them for a time being. And so I moved on from there, and so it was the second day after that, the doctors came in to me, and I had a meeting with, there was a bone specialist, a foot specialist, and a vascular surgeon, and they all 3 came, and they all had the same story. They said, you know what, Ernie, that leg is not in good shape, and we can't promise you anything that's going to be workable, and if you decide to keep that leg, you're going to be probably 3 to 5 years of surgeries, And we can't promise you anything that's going to be workable after that. We just simply can't, and your best option would be to take the foot. And I had to make a decision on that, and so it took me 4 days, me and my children, to make that decision, and I made it on my own, and I finally decided to go ahead and have the foot taken. And after I did, my children said to me, you know what, Dad, that was the right choice, because you would be in lots of trouble with that foot as it was. And so I'd finally called the doctor in, and I said to the doctor, I've decided that it's time that we're going to take the foot off. And he said, that's the right choice. And so he said he would make arrangements for the surgery. So to be the exact date, Monday, October the 9th at 11 o'clock in the morning, I was scheduled for surgery to remove that leg, that foot. And I remember waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I thought to myself, I don't know if I can go through with this thing. I just don't know if I can do this, taking my foot off. And there's just so many things. My mind was rolling through, and then I've thought of all those young guys that were injured in that bus accident in Humboldt last year, and I thought, you know what? So many of those young guys are paralyzed now. And I thought of the many ladies that go through breast cancers with a surgery and have a healthy breast removed because afraid of a disease down the road. And I thought, and then there's one little fella that came to my mind, and I thought of little Kobe. And a lot of you know Kobe. He is 6 years old now, and you know little Kobe was born without legs. And I thought of him, and I thought, you know what? Little Kobe will never know the joy and the freedom that I had for 66 years of walking on 2 natural legs. And I thought, you know what? I can do this. And so I went ahead with the surgery, but I can tell you, folks, it was really strange waking up and looking down at the end of the bed and only seeing 1 foot there. That was very, very difficult. However, after the surgery, the next morning after the surgery, the doctors and the physiotherapist came in along with the nurse, and they brought me a walker and a wheelchair and said that this is how I'm going to start. And I thought to myself, you know what? The surgery's over, the leg is gone, it's onward and upward from here, and I'm going to master this thing, and we're going to work at it. So they showed me and did the demonstration for me as how that's going to work, and I thought, you know what? I'll get this thing. I'll make it go. So later on that afternoon, my son Ross happened to be at the hospital with me, and we decided that I'm going to do my maiden voyage with this walker thing. So I got off the edge of my bed and onto the walker, and we started going, and Ross was holding the thing with the bags hanging on it and all the stuff, and we was wheeling out, and my bed was the closest to the door. I was about 15 feet from the door. So I got to the walker and I started walking, and by the time I got to the door, I was just felt like I had run half a marathon. I was just exhausted, and I said to Ross, I says, you know what, Ross, I'm starting to feel a little bit weak. We better turn around. And it's a good thing they put a big belt around me, and he was holding me by the belt. And by the time I got turned around and got back to my bed, he sat me on the edge of my bed, and I says, I think I need something to drink. I'm going to faint. And I don't even recall if I got anything to drink. I don't think I did, and I fainted. And it's a good thing he was there hanging on to me, and I came to, and he was still holding on to me, and there was a nurse there, and they were going to put me in bed. And I said, no, that's fine. I'll just sit here. You know what? I'm tough. I'll just sit here, and I'll catch my breath, and I'll be okay. So I sat there for about 5-6 minutes and trying to catch my breath, and then I finally decided that I'm going to go back to bed. So I swung my limb over in my other leg, and by the time I swung my limb and my other leg over, I was exhausted again to the point that I fainted right in bed. And by the time I fainted the second time around and came to, there was about 3 or 4 medical people, and they had back on oxygen again. And one of the nurses said, that's not normal. That's not normal. We need to check him out. And they thought that I was filling up with fluid on my lungs, and so they brought a mobile x-ray machine in. And the X-ray showed negative. There was no fluid, and the nurse said, there's something wrong. We need to check this out further. So that afternoon, they took me down for a CT scan. And within an hour of my CT scan, I had a doctor standing by my bed, and he said, Mr. Breitkreuz, he said, we have some bad news for you. And I kind of looked at him, and he says, yes. He says, we have bad news for you. He says, we found some blood clots. And he said, not only one, but we found a blood clot on each of your lungs. And at that point, my son Ross was standing at the end of my bed, and he turned pale, and I thought, okay, now he's going to faint. But he didn't. And so the doctor was quite adamant about saying, okay, he said, this is your situation. You have 2 blood clots. For the next 4 days, you are on complete bed rest. And within probably about 10 minutes, we had nurses there, and they gave me a liquid blood thinners. And every 6 hours, they would be checking my blood to see how the coagulation was going. And I would be complete bed rest for 4 days. And so I thought, oh my gosh, there's just another hill to climb, and I didn't need this. But it was, I was where I was, and there was nothing that was going to be changing that. So I spent the next 4 days in bed without moving, and by the time day 5 came around, the physiotherapist said, well, we're going to try to get you out of bed. So they slowly got me out of bed, and I did a little walk to the door and back, and I managed that. And so that was good enough for that day, and the next day they came, and we accelerated from there. And as the days went on, I just kept going further and further down the hallway, and then it was time to move me into the next floor, where I was going to go down to the rehabilitation and the physiotherapy floor. And as I got there, I got to tell you, folks, I had a real eye opener. Because by the time I got to the rehab floor, I was doing fairly well in my wheelchair. I could get myself around and get myself onto the walker. And I got to the rehab floor, and I was feeling sorry for myself, because I looked at my limb and I thought, oh my, I don't have a leg. And by the time I got to the floor, I'd met a few other people that were in not very good condition. And I'll just share a story about a couple of fellas that were there. I met Tim. Tim was on the rehab floor, and Tim was retired, 63 years old. And Tim was riding his bicycle down the road, and he saw this twig on the road. And as it happened, this twig came up and got caught in the spokes, and Tim went head over heels, had his helmet on, and overnight, Tim had surgery, and he damaged a vertebrae in his lower neck and between his shoulder blades. And Tim was totally healthy, but he had 2 arms that hung like spaghetti, and he was sitting in a wheelchair. And overnight, his wife was standing there feeding him, and she was wiping Tim's bum. And I thought to myself, when I looked at my limb, I thought, you know what, Lord, I'm so blessed. I got it good. And then there was a young fella right in the bed next to me, a guy by the name of Doug. And Doug was under 30. He was in his late 20s. Likewise, was riding his bicycle, and Doug got hit by a pickup truck, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. And Doug was now in a diaper and probably going to be there for the rest of his life. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, wow, Lord, I am so blessed. And that gave me an eye-opener, and that really helped me to say, okay, I'm going to work at this, and I can do it. And I knew that one day I would be walking again. I knew that. But for Tim and for Doug, well, Tim was walking for Doug. I don't know if Doug will ever walk again. And I tell you, I prayed for him, and so many times in the process of me being in the hospital and me having the nurses come to me. I can't tell you how many times over the period of days that I was in, and the nurses came to me and said, wow, wow. And I had so many wows that came about when they saw my limb and how I was healing up and how I was improving. And I remember saying to the one nurse one time, I said, you know what, I have a lot of people praying for me. And she kind of looked at me and said, yeah, you just hang on to that thought. It's all okay. I know that medically we're doing our job, but you just hang on to that prayer thing. And I thought, you know what, I will. I'll hang on to that prayer thing. And as I went through the rehab, I just got improved better and better, and I was able to, within a week before I left, they were able to fit me for a leg and build me a prosthetic foot and a leg. And before I left the hospital, I was actually able to walk out of the hospital on my own steam. And that was a real blessing. But there's a couple things I just want to bring your attention to in all of this, is that I just want to say thanks so much to you folks for your prayers, your cards, the emails, the texts that I got while I was in the hospital. It's unbelievable how much that meant to me and what that did for me. Because I won't make you look at that and look up the reference today, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the Bible talks about the family. And many of you know that sometimes if you stub your toe, if you have a sore shoulder, if you have a sore arm or sore elbow, it hurts. And sometimes it feels like the whole body hurts. And that's what it was like when I was in the hospital. When I got the cards and the letter, the emails, and I'm saying letters, that's all, the emails and the texts, and so many, I could feel that you people were hurting with me. And it was just so wonderful to know that I had so many people back here and in my church and my community praying for me and wishing me well. And there's another thing that I thought of many, many times over and over, and that is, what if, just what if, at the time when I was laying on that stretcher looking at the ceiling and said, Lord, just take me home. And I thought, what if God would have just answered my prayer and taken me home? What if he would have taken me home? And you know what? I wasn't afraid of that. Because in John 3:16 it says, for God so loved the world that whoever believes on him will have everlasting life. And I knew that I had that everlasting life. And I wasn't afraid. I got a quote that my son sent to me a number of months ago, and it's a quote from a book that he was reading by a guy about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the quote goes something like this, and I'll read just a portion of it. For us as believers, death is the gateway to our homeland, the tabernacle of joy to the everlasting kingdom of peace. You know what? In closing, I don't want to tell you folks that I came here, had an accident, and everything is good and it's rosy and it's just so wonderful. You know what? It's not. I still wish I had my foot today. It's not easy. I still hurt. I have many days that are very uncomfortable. And it's a little awkward. I don't slip in and out of my shoes like I once did. I'm slower than I once was. But I got to tell you, folks, God understands our frustration. He knows our hurts. He knows our pains. And God is good, and he is faithful. And God loves us as we are. And I got to tell you, there isn't one of us here that knows what next week's going to hold. We don't even know what tomorrow, how it's going to start or end. But all I know for sure is God is good. And we have to be ready so we don't have to be afraid. Pastor Bob, thank you so much.